Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show, where we help you make the wisest and most profitable decisions. I'm Dr. Gleb Tsipursky, the CEO of Disaster Avoidance Experts, the future work consultancy that sponsors the Wise Decision Maker Show. And I'm joined today by Peggy. Peggy, can you please introduce yourself and share a little bit about what you do?
Yes, absolutely. First of all, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to talk to you. So I'm Peggie Rothe. I'm Chief Insights and Research Officer at Leesman. And at Leesman, we basically work with a mission to help organizations create better places to work. We
Mhm.
do that by offering a completely standardized and independent measure of how employees experience both working in the office and how they experience working remotely. And we do that with a standardized survey to which we've collected a lot of data. We have more than
Mhm.
1.3 million responses to the questions around your office experience and more than 500,000
Mhm.
to questions around how you experience working remotely. And what I do then at Leesman is I lead the team that's responsible for everything we do with the data. So everything from
Mhm.
client reporting to then generating insights that we can share with the wider world and the industry to help everyone create better places to work.
Excellent. So tell me a little bit about the new study that you put out, the Power of Play study. What did the results show? What does the study show?
Yeah, so the power of a play study that we published, basically we in that study we wanted to answer one fundamental question around why do we need outstanding workplaces in a hybrid working world? Because
Hmm.
the reality is in the hybrid world we have a lot of employees working less from the office than before. So I guess in one way a viable question for well, especially for perhaps any CFO to ask is why should we be investing in our offices? Why do we have to
Hmm.
make them good when people are spending less and less time in the office? So that's the first question we wanted to answer. Like, why do we still need to create the best possible offices to our employees? And then on the
Hmm.
other hand, we looked at our data also to look at how do you do that when you've identified
Hmm.
this is what we need to do? How do you actually go about doing that?
So tell me a little bit about why you need to create a good experience in the office from an ROI perspective. So you're talking about a finance CFO, and you come to them. So you're not talking to a CHRO who obviously values employee experience. You're talking to from a company bottom line perspective. Why is there value in creating a positive office experience? And how much, when you get to 90%, how much valuable is it to get to 95% or 99%?
Yeah, I mean, so in this study, what we did was we looked at or we did a comparison between really outstanding workplaces that have achieved a Leesman Plus certification. So basically, they when they've done the survey, the results have shown that they offer really outstanding experiences to their employees, and we
Mhm.
compared those to just average offices. So the ones that are actually fairly okay. We could have done a comparison to the really poor ones, but we chose to do comparisons to basically the average office, which is kind of the office that represents if you have an okay office and you choose not
Mhm.
to invest in it any further. And we identified basically four key advantages that it will bring if you have an outstanding office compared to just an average one. The first one being around the pride
Mhm.
that it supports the employees, which perhaps to your question is more of an HR related metric that HR
Mhm.
is more interested in, but it supports employees' connection to the organization and being proud of the
Mhm.
organization. But the second one was around how it supports individual focused work and productivity,
Mhm.
which is certainly something I think that the CFO will, or that language the CFO will understand. So if we have an office that really supports employees being able to work in a productive way, naturally that's an advantage we want to
Mhm.
have. Then the two other advantages was in terms of how well an outstanding workplace supports a sense of community and working together and
Mhm.
collaborating. And then the fourth one is related to just simply how much more of an enjoyable place it is to work in
Mhm.
compared to you just have an average workplace. And all of these things are super important, even in a hybrid
Mhm.
work where employees work less from the office because, first of all, they have a choice. They can choose not to go to the office. So if you want the employees to go to the office, you have to provide them with something that they enjoy working in.
Mm.
Because we work a lot more remotely, when we're actually in the office, we of course need to have an environment that supports us collaborating and working together face to face, which is something that is slightly different when you're working remotely. So there's tons of reasons really why we still need outstanding offices, even though we are
Mm.
working more remotely nowadays.
Now, when I think about that, I think of companies that are already have high productivity, high morale, good collaboration, they're probably more likely to invest into a better quality office. So how do you separate that differentiation? Let's say you're a company that gets the results, but you don't have inherently good productivity, inherently good motivation, inherently good morale, and you think, aha, I will get myself a better office and that will just all occur. But to what extent, in reality, is it that companies that are already have high pride have good offices? Like, were you able to control for these factors and then just separate out the elements associated with a good office?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's something that we can't completely control of.
Hmm.
And I completely agree with you that if we think about the employee experience, it's made of so many different elements where we would say the workplace is one element, but naturally, I mean, things like leadership and generally, how motivated people, like those are things that will impact kind of overall employee experience a
Mhm.
lot as well. But it's not to say that the workplace is not an important factor in this. Now, all our questions, though, are related to how you experience that the workplace impacts on things. So it's again, like I think it can be expected that if you're very demotivated, for example, in your role, you might look at the workplace in slightly more a negative light. But then again, when we are looking at 1,100 workplaces, those extremes will kind of even themselves out anyways. So it's still nonetheless interesting findings that we have based on the data.
Hmm. Now, when I think about the data, so and people coming to the office, like you're saying, well, if you want people to come to the office, you need to have a nice office. When I look at data about, and I do a lot of work, as you know, I do a lot of work with companies, helping them figure out their hybrid work and remote work policies. I wrote a book called Returning to the Office on leading hybrid remote teams. I see the number one complaint of people around the office not being the office itself, but the commute to the office. And so I'm curious if that comes across in your data, not the office itself, but the commute experience. So I hear people saying like, well, I'd be much more likely to come to the office if you don't have one centralized office that I have to drive like an hour and a half to. But maybe you can create like a flex office space where me and some colleagues can get together that only takes me 15 minutes to get there. And so you don't have as nice of an office experience because you don't know it. It's a flex office space, but it takes you 15 minutes to commute there instead of 90 minutes to commute. So do you think about those trade-offs between investing into the office space experience itself, that's going to be one nice centralized office, or investing into more flex office spaces to which people can more easily commute?
I think I completely agree with you, and the commute is extremely important. We've seen that in other studies that we've done around hybrid working as
Hmm.
well, where I mean, commute is definitely one of the factors that people take into consideration. Do I go to the office or not? Um, and because of that, I mean, something we said in the study as well is that so investing in your workplaces and creating a better environment, it does not necessarily mean people are going to go there more often because there are
Hmm.
so many other things that have an impact on that as well. But what it does
Hmm.
mean is that when people go back to the office or when they are in the office, be that 1 day a week for someone, 3 days a week for someone else, maybe once a month for someone else, they will have a better experience. So it's not necessarily, and that's something we said in the study as well. We should stop shifting or having the focus on how do we get people back, but instead I'll actually focus on how do we ensure that everyone has an outstanding experience when they are there,
Mm.
regardless of how often that is. Because that's the way you can create the office so that it really supports the hybrid puzzle for each and every employee. Now, then we
Mm.
have to remember all employees are different. So for some, the commute is not an issue. For some people who live a lot further away, it might be a bigger thing. In this other study that we worked on as well, we asked, for example, how do you look at the commute? And even though we saw the biggest proportion saying that they see it as something stressful and it's a waste of time,
Mm.
we had, I think, still over 30% who said that it's just a time to reflect. So it
Mm.
just shows that we are all very different, and therefore, what we should do is create different options for employees. And what you mentioned, having locations that employees can go if they have a long commute, so that they can perhaps utilize the benefits of an office somewhere closer to them. I think that for some organizations, for some employees, that's a great idea.
Mm. Now, let's talk about if you do want to create a nice office. So you mentioned yourself just now that employees are different. And whenever I do focus groups with employees, different demographics tell me different things. Like working parents place a high value, especially working moms, on having childcare available in the office. Or some people who have often working parents, but also people who are younger, who have a lot of roommates, place a lot of value on having separate individualized workspaces in the office that are quiet. Whereas others tell me that really they're only coming to the office for collaboration and they only want to be there for a meeting. So you should make it all collaborative space. And they don't care if you have hoteling because they don't really they don't really work much at the office. Maybe they'll come and hoteling is fine for them. So looking at the different demographics that have different needs, what do you see as a priority in terms of the ROI for for companies to invest into in their offices?
I think it's in one way it's a simple answer, but it's a very difficult one. It's variety. So our data keeps showing that offering a
Mhm.
variety of different types of workspace and different types of work settings, variety of services as well. That's what basically leads to outstanding experience. Now, it's a simple answer, but the difficulty is, what does that variety look like? Well, it's going to
Mhm.
look different for different demographics, different for different organizations, different functions within an organization. But if you offer variety, then you basically enable the employee themselves to choose what they use,
Mhm.
and make sure that whatever they need in that moment, depending on whatever task they're about to undertake, or even the mood that they're in that moment, they can choose a setting that is most suitable for that. So
Mhm.
so that's the number one key thing that also we saw in our study, that those workplaces where you had high satisfaction with variety, basically you then had high satisfaction with everything else. So it's almost like, perhaps simplistically said, but if you get variety right, you almost
Mhm.
cannot fail. But the big challenge for all organizations out there is to understand your employees, understand your demographics, and understand what the right variety is for them. I mean, we were working with global organizations, and even though they're rolling out um, kind of standardized concepts, what the
Mhm.
variety of space looks like in that concept in different locations still differs because of local needs and variations. So, yeah, I'd say if I had to sum it up in one word, it's variety.
Mhm. Yeah, so I find that interesting. When, like, for example, when I was working with Microsoft and when I went to their offices, that's a great office. They have tons of variety. It's beautiful, like their executive campus, their office space, that's wonderful. They have everything they can want. Google has everything they can want. But most companies are not able to afford that variety. So for most companies, when I work with them, we do something like, well, if you're coming to the office frequently, we're going to give you a private space. If you're not coming to the office frequently, you're going to have a hoteling space or something like that. And if you're a working parent, but if you therefore spend more time working from home, and we'll fund some upgrades for your home office, have it soundproofed, maybe give you a standing desk. So kind of in terms of ROI, obviously most organizations can't invest in the kind of variety that Microsoft or Google or Nvidia are going to be able to afford. So when you're thinking about as an organization, so not from a wealth and luxury perspective, but from a financial perspective, you're investing, like what should you choose to prioritize or what should be your decision tree when you're thinking about that? Like that's a conversation I often have with CFOs who when I tell them, it's certainly nice to have everything for all people, but they can't afford it.
Yeah, no, I mean, and certainly not like everything for all people. You have to take into consideration that even if you have your own desk and then you would have variety in addition to that, then something is always empty, essentially. But I would
Mhm.
almost challenge that variety doesn't have to be expensive necessarily. So we
Mm.
see organizations that we work with, we even see public sector organizations that have created unassigned workplaces with good variety that are scoring
Mhm.
really, really well. So, and I think we can assume that the public sector doesn't necessarily have the budgets similar to the Microsofts,
Mhm.
for example. So it doesn't necessarily have to be expensive, but if we go into concretely, like what do you need to I guess prioritize? First of all, individual focused work is the hygiene factor of work. That's something our data has we've seen in the data multiple times that you like everyone does individual focused work. And so that's something you have to support in one way or the
Mhm.
other. Now, because of hybrid work, we do quite a lot of focused work at home. However,
Mhm.
not everyone has a place at home to do it properly. And also, if we go to the office for meetings or so, chances are we still need to do some focused work in between our meetings and
Mhm.
collaborations. So that's number one. You have to support that in some way. And then, of course, and also, sorry, just about individual focused work, we have to remember that there's different types of it. There's the snorkeling kind where you just put your head down and you
Mm.
focus on something, and if you get interrupted, that's fine because you can then continue on where you were interrupted. But then there's the deep dive kind as well, where if you get interrupted, you have to go all the way back to the surface,
Mm.
and then for you to deep dive back into what you were doing, it takes a long time. So
Mhm.
those might be two different types of environments that you need to provide depending on
Mm.
what's the focused work that your employees are doing. Then you want to, of course, support collaboration and working together in some ways. Um, Naturally now with hybrid, chances are that people are going to be on calls even when they're in the office. So you need to have environments for that as well. That goes very much hand in hand with individual work as well, because if you're not offering places for people to do their calls, then they are likely to do the calls where other people might sit and try to do focused work. So it's one thing impacts the other. Um, so I would really kind of recommend starting from thinking about what is it that the organization sees that they have the office for? What's the
Mhm.
purpose of the office for that organization and for those employees? And therefore, what are the activities that people go there to
Mm.
do? Individual focus work, probably one of them, and collaboration, another one. And then from that, start to think about, well, what are the features? What are the environmental features that we need to have and do really well? But it all starts from an understanding of the employees and what they do and what they need.
Excellent. Now, as we're finishing up and you're thinking about the future of where this office space is heading, what do you think will be the office space of the future? What do you predict?
I think it's certainly something that has variety, the right kind of variety. I think
Mm.
it's something where we definitely don't go back to every day like there's no going back
Mm.
to the pre-pandemic way of working. So I think we're going to find some sort of balance of how we hopefully maximize the experience with using the home, using other locations, third spaces, other places to work, and then where the office is an important piece of the hybrid work infrastructure. But I think it's to a large extent, I think it is something that offers a lot of variety. Our data is suggesting that we are certainly heading towards a future where fewer and fewer people have their own designated workstation.
Mm.
Um, but that's replaced with variety, which then provides them with an opportunity to really utilize the best settings for each activity that they do.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise, Peggy. This was very helpful.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And thank you to the audience for checking out another episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show. Please make sure to subscribe wherever you checked out the show and leave a review. It helps others discover the show and helps us improve the show.